This evening we have a number of guests with us to give us some information about the Swinomish boundary expansion. We have two county commissioners. Well, Ron Wesen isn't here yet, but he should be arriving. And we have Lisa Janicki. We also have Anacortes Mayor Laurie, Gere, and City Attorney Darcy Swetnam. We have two representatives from the Samish tribe, Chairman Wooten, and their attorney, Dorsay. And did I forget somebody? Oh, Honea, yes, county attorney. Is there anybody else here with an official?
I'd like to introduce my tribal council. They're unfortunately got here late, so they're standing up against the wall. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, and thank all the property owners here for coming as well. It's great to see such a good turnout. My name is Dan Dubel, by the way. I'm just one of the property owners. I got roped into standing up here for a few minutes to start things. But
Turn it up or speak up a little bit.
Is that better? Okay. So I'm sorry we don't have the resources to provide a dinner for everybody. We'll have to get by with some coffee and cookies. I'd like to thank Donna Carr, Joni Bullfinch, Molly McIntosh, Karen Sordens, and for their organizational efforts here getting this meeting set up. And of course, I'd like to thank our guests for coming. Just provide a little bit of background, not everybody may be completely familiar. In 1855, a number of Native American tribes agreed to what is known as the Treaty of Point Elliott. That treaty set aside lands for some of the tribes, including the Swinomish. The boundaries were established by waterfront except for in the northwest corner. In 1873, President Grant issued an executive order clarifying the northern boundary, thus setting the boundaries for the current reservation. The Swinomish claimed that before the executive order, the reservation included March Point and land south to Summit Bay. And they're asking that the reservation be officially recognized to include that additional land now. All, or nearly all, of that additional land is owned in fee simple, meaning the owner has absolute title to the land, free of any other claims against the title. Federal law, however, gives Native peoples authority to exercise control over land use within reservation boundaries. What that means for non-Indian owned fee simple land within a reservation is an important question, I think, for property owners. Now, there are a number of interested parties. We've got the county, the city, the Samish, business owners, including the two refineries. Is there anybody here from either refinery, by the way? Okay, they were invited. And of course, just individual property owners. Now, a few weeks ago, we heard this Swinomish perspective, and the purpose of this evening's meeting is to allow property owners to hear from the county and the city. And they will speak for a few minutes, and then I think it would be probably most efficient if I ask a few questions that I've collected, and then after that we can open up the floor for questions from the audience. I would point out that since this issue has attracted so much attention, that everything said here tonight will be widely disseminated. And if there are representatives of the Swinomish here tonight, I would ask you to simply observe. You have made your opinions and perspective public. We have established an email account to distribute information to property owners as it becomes available. It was on the card that was mailed out to you. It's fidalgopropertyowners@gmail.com. Just one word, Fidalgo Property Owners. So please send an email to that address, and then we'll get your correct email address and add it to our mailing list. So that's all I had to say, and I think we'll let our guests do rock, paper, scissors, or whatever they want to decide who's going to go first. You can stand up here and use the microphone, or I'll hand it to you at the table, whichever you prefer.
Hey Dave, go over that email address one more time, fidalgopropertyowners@gmail.com.
That's it.
Thank you very much for your great introduction. Tonight, the City of Anacortes, we put together to date what we have done and our perspective, and we've asked Ms. Bullfinch to hand out a copy. We need 125, so if you're a couple, share them. If not, we'll put this on the city website tomorrow morning, and you can get access to that. So I'm going to just do a little introduction and talk about the map, and then Darcy Swetnam is the Anacortes City Attorney. She will go through the process of what we've done to date and what our perspective is of this proposal. So as was stated just a few minutes ago, there's been several recent processes through which the BIA, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Swinomish Indian tribal community have asserted the boundary of the reservation should be updated to reflect what they believe to be the correct historical reservation boundary. The Swinomish assert that their reservation boundary was created by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855 and included all areas east of the dotted line. So there's a map on this, so when I'm talking, I'm referring to that map. Included in all the areas east of the dotted line shown running through the golf course into the map below. The current reservation boundary was set by executive order issued by President Grant in 1873, and it's shown on the map with the red line. The requested historical boundary would include all of March Point, Summit Park, and the property along Highway 20 east of the golf course. Property owners in that area are concerned about their impacts of ownership, their property, the jurisdiction, and property values. So that's the general background from where we're working from, and I'm going to have Ms. Swetnam now go over all the recent actions and what the city has done and our perspective.
All right, thank you, and thank you all for being here. We wanted to give you a little bit of background about what the city's understanding is of the actions that have been taken by which the Swinomish have asserted the change in the reservation boundary and what the city has done to respond to those actions. And I just want to clarify that, we're speaking from the standpoint of what the city's understanding is and what the city's involvement has been. And so hopefully that gives you some insights on what's happened so far. So there are three main things that we understand that the Swinomish tribe has done, and I'd like to go through those briefly. The first one is that they've proposed an amendment to their constitution and bylaws. And I think this is something that's happening throughout the country with other tribes as well, where they're attempting to update constitutions and bylaws to eliminate the amount of control or supervision that the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs has over the routine operation of the tribe. So one of the examples that members of the Swinomish tribe provided to the city when they came and spoke to our city council was that currently, in order to hire an attorney, they have to get approval from the BIA before they do that. And so I think there are a number of the amendments that they've proposed in their constitution that deal with those type of internal day-to-day operations. In their original application to update their constitution, they did assert that the territory of the reservation should be corrected to include the area that Mayor Gere described. That being the difference between the boundary that currently is the reservation boundary and what they claim that it should be based on historical documentation. And the city was encouraged to note that the BIA responded to the Swinomish in a letter dated September 13th. And the language that they used was that the proposed amendment that would change the territory conflicts with existing law and cannot move forward as presented. So we understood that to be a pretty final determination by the BIA that they would not continue to process those portions of the constitutional amendments that asserted a different reservation boundary. We also, since this issue came up, the city's been doing a lot of research, as have, I'm sure, all of the other stakeholders and jurisdictions. in an attempt to understand where this discussion started and where it might be going. And we have looked at, and there was in 1971, the BIA Tribal Claims Commission considered a formal request that was submitted by the Swinomish to change their reservation boundary. And this request was denied in a formal order, citing historical documents and maps that were evaluated by an expert at the time that that claim was made. Additionally, and there have been other cases where this issue has been considered in a formal capacity, but there's also a 1934 case called Swinomish versus United States, where in part the court held that actually the 1873 executive order expanded the area of the reservation beyond what was originally granted in the 1855 treaty. So as you can imagine, if you go back and look at the historical maps, the areas look a little different than they do on our maps today. So there's some consideration of what the maps look like at that point in history. Another action that the Swinomish have taken, and I say action, I'm grouping a couple of actions together, is that they have applied through the Bureau of Indian Affairs to convert property that they own that is within this disputed area to trust property. And what that's called is a fee to trust application, and that's a formal process by which the property is converted from fee simple property owned by the tribe, just like many of you own your property in fee simple ownership, to trust property held in trust for the Swinomish by the United States of America. And the reason why they do that is because once a property is in trust status, there are additional things that the tribe can do with that property, and it allows them greater flexibility. For example, they can do things like place casinos on the property, which they couldn't do if it wasn't in trust. They've got some flexibility, I believe, with marijuana businesses, etc. So property held in trust on a reservation, and I think this is maybe the point that is at the heart of some of the concern about this issue, would not be subject to the jurisdiction and the taxing authority of the city, the county, or any local taxing jurisdictions. So that's maybe a big part of the concern. Properties with fee to trust applications to date that the Swinomish have applied be converted to trust property are the gas station property across from the golf course and the golf course property itself. When the Swinomish did these applications for fee to trust on these properties, they used the process that is appropriate for land that's in the reservation. So essentially the way the city understands it, and our Samish may have some clarifications to make to our understanding, but our understanding is that there is a expedited process for fee to trust applications for property within a reservation boundary. Property can be converted to trust property outside a reservation boundary, but it's a longer process. So the city objected to the process that was used because the city's understanding is that those two properties are not within the reservation boundary and as such should not be processed through the expedited reservation application process. So some of how this could play out in the future is other properties that could be converted to trust properties could include the new opioid treatment clinic that the tribe is working on, which is in the old Bayside Fitness building next to the reservation. So they do own that property in fee ownership, so they could conceivably apply to put that into trust as well. And similarly, any property that they acquire in fee ownership in the future could be similarly converted to trust property. One of the other actions that the Swinomish have taken in which they have asserted a change to the reservation boundary is that they objected to the Samish Indian Nation's fee to trust application for the Summit Park property. And I wasn't aware that you'd be here, so if I summarize this incorrectly, please correct me. But as we understand it, the Samish Indian Nation owns property along Highway 20 and have filed a fee to trust application for that property back in 2016. Once in trust, I think there was some indication that they might be looking to put a casino on that property. And the Swinomish did object to that application in their objection letter. they asserted that that property is located on the Swinomish Reservation. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, because this issue has been addressed by the Swinomish and some of the information that they've put out to the public, what the city's relationship has been with the Swinomish. To date, because we're all on the same island, we've worked cooperatively to address important community issues. The Swinomish Indian tribal community is a customer of the Anacortes regional water system, and the tribe and the city cooperate to provide essential services on the reservation. So the city does provide regularly emergency services to the tribe on the reservation, including fire EMS services, and the Swinomish pays the city for those services. In 2016, they paid over $86,000 for ambulance and police services. 2015, it was nearly $100,000 for those same services. 2014, it was $67,000. But the point there is that those payments were made for services that the city did provide to their communities. So to date, the city has taken certain actions to address the dispute over the reservation boundary. And I can't overstate enough how much we're working on this issue behind the scenes, researching, paying attention to what's happening. And as you can maybe tell, this is just kind of a thumbnail of what's gone on, but there are a lot of complicated federal processes involved, a lot of old historical information that's relevant to the discussion. And so there's a lot of information gathering and sorting that's happened today. One of the things we did do was we sent a letter to, on December 16th, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the Swinomish's Fee to Trust application for the gas station parcel. And the city was supposed to receive notice of that application, and we did not. We aren't sure why, probably because of administrative oversight more than anything. But the city wanted to make sure that we preserved the opportunity to comment on that application. And that was followed up by a letter dated January 24th to the BIA on the Fee to Trust application for the gas station property. And that was where the city disputed the Swinomish's assertion of the location of the reservation boundary. Finally, the city is also paying attention to, there's a separate process that's going on. We sent a letter on March 9th to the Bureau of Indian Affairs requesting transcripts of a recent proposed rulemaking meeting. And that's a kind of a separate issue, but we see that it could potentially be related. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has considered a process of potential updates to Indian trader statutes, which could provide the tribes with greater authority and control over businesses operating on reservations. And the stated purpose of the proposed rulemaking is to support tribal self-determination and self-governance, which the city generally supports and is interested in what that process looks like. BIA held a closed tribal consultation at the Swinomish Casino on February 23rd. We requested that we be able to attend, but we were told that it was a closed meeting, not open to the public. There are apparently 8 similar meetings going on around the country to gather information on this issue, and so the city is hopefully going to get a transcript of that meeting and find out what happened there. So those are the things that the city has done. We're interested and open to different perspectives and information, and certainly are taking serious any concerns of members of our community about what the impacts of these things might be.
Yeah, this is Lisa Janicki. I'm gonna ask Will to kind of give a background of how the county sees there are some stories of really good relationships with the various tribes in the county, and there is a template for how this can work well. But I have to say that with some of the recent actions of the Swinomish, I look at this as kind of the Great Wolf Lodge / Shelter Bay thing just gone amok, and I don't want to end up there. But there are some good stories of how the tribe the county can work together with perhaps like Upper Skagit tribe, and how our support of Samish Indian Nation pulled us into this conversation. So.
Thank you. My name is Will Honea. I'm a civil attorney in Skagit County. Darcy did a great job telling the background of all this and the facts that have led up to where we are today. The handout that they provided is a really good, succinct summary of what's going on. Make sure you keep that. Looks like a good information source. What the county's done is essentially the same thing as what the city's done. We've objected to the proposed expansion of the reservation boundary. We objected to these properties being brought into trust. By the way, we do not, as a matter of policy, object when land on the reservation is brought into trust. So just a point of clarity here, what we're talking about is when Swinomish has purchased these essentially business properties off reservation, and then the idea is to pull them off the tax rolls, pull them off the regulatory rolls, so that they're effectively no longer part of the state of Washington, Skagit County, or the city. That's what we're objecting to. I don't want to repeat what Darcy said, but I think, first of all, the county, we became aware of this through the Samish tribe, actually. And, I think this ties into kind of the right way to handle all this stuff. Ultimately, we all want to get along with each other. We're all here for the long term. Nobody's going away. So how do we figure out a long-term perspective to deal with these issues? With respect to the reservation boundary and its expansion, I think what Darcy did a good job of talking about is the law seems pretty clear that this is not Swinomish Reservation, that they're wrong in asserting that, and it's been dealt with previously by courts and the facts. And so the BIA has rejected this interpretation as far as we can tell. Now, one thing about dealing with the BIA, I know some of you filed FOIA requests to try to get documents out of them. They perceive themselves as trustees for tribes. So a trustee, in the way that a bank takes care of your money, they perceive that obligation, and I think there's some merit to it. So it's not completely beyond the pale that they're looking to slow down, you might say. But in any event, the BIA has said we don't agree with this interpretation. It's not Swinomish Reservation. The way this process works is Swinomish are seeking pre-approval of this constitutional amendment, which then gets put to their voters, to tribal members. And then the Secretary of the Interior will either approve or disapprove that. It seems like that's not going to happen at this point. Nevertheless, Swinomish leadership has been talking about, no, this is our reservation. So, in some sense, there's not much for the county or the city to do. As a matter of law, as a matter of what lawyers do, we wouldn't have essentially an official opportunity to engage until the Secretary of the Interior approved this, and then an appeal could be filed, an administrative appeal, and then go to court after that. So really, the main problem right now is all of you that own property that are left in flux. What's the status of my land? I don't know. So that's a problematic piece, obviously, but I think from the perspective of the county, we feel fairly confident that with this were brought forward. Nevertheless, the facts and the law are on their side in this. And Ms. Swetnam talked about some of the law. The secondary issue to all this is this idea of land being put into trust and taken off the tax rolls. Now, there's good reasons for it sometimes. Tribes can't exercise their right to operate casinos unless they have land in trust and various other things. And there's kind of all of this is in some sense about a philosophy about how this should be properly handled in the community. Upper Skagit they have a couple properties in trust and they operate the casino, but for the most part, they bought properties all over the place. They bought Craig Dorsay's stock over in Lacan, paying $60,000 a year taxes on that. They've got residential property all over Cedar Woolley. That's on the tax rolls. They're paying taxes on that. With respect to the Samish, they approached Skagit County to enter an agreement with us by which we would provide services. So Darcy talked about the city provides services to Swinomish This happens all the time in tribes, that local governments by contract provide services. So Samish are seeking, as many of you know, right across the road here. They approached us and they agreed to just pay an analogous property tax and sales tax. And say, you know, we need this land trust, there's a need for it. But we also recognize that we're all in this together. We all drive on these roads, we all send our kids to these schools. It's kind of a slippery slope problem if there's no conceptual end to property being purchased and pulled off the tax rolls. Eventually you have a declining base of everybody who's paying taxes and another class that aren't. Now, it's one thing when it's on reservation. It's one thing when it's land that is within the existing boundaries of the reservation. Nobody objects to that being brought into trust and to reassembling a contiguous tribal homeland. That's what the reservation is. The more problematic piece is, I'm going to buy a business over here that competes with everybody else, but I don't have to pay property taxes or observe the same regulations. That's problematic when you play that over the long term. With respect to cannabis operations, Samish also have proposed cannabis operations, same thing, the lands and trusts, same thing, property. Same thing, they agree to pay essentially an analogous level of property tax and sales tax. They didn't have to do that, but there was a recognition there implicitly that our community works better if we're all in it together. And so, the Swinomish, for example, they do pay what's called impact mitigation funds. So there are funds that come from the casino, but that's explicitly there to offset the impacts on the community. It's not there to pay for roads, infrastructure, fire protection, police protection, all that. And so that's, I think, the overarching narrative of all this and why these objections are being filed in the underlying process. We all need to pitch in together, pay property tax and sales tax. Otherwise, it is an inherent conflict that's going to go on for generations.
I'm Ron Wesen, Skagit County Commissioner for District 1, which is this area here. I really do appreciate the amount of crowd being here tonight and understanding what's going on, the rest of our knowledge, what we have going forward. One of the things from my perspective as Commissioner, there are several things that happened over the last 8-10 years that I think the public needs to be aware of, and we're trying to make sure we get out ahead of it, make sure. That's why we sent the letter out in November, to make sure you're aware of some of the things that are going on. One of the things with the in-stream flow rule was done back in 2001. Some things happened in the draft. It changed to the final, and it just changed. And so that was a concern to me personally. We've had the Great Wolf Lodge decision with the Shelter Bay properties coming off the tax rolls that had a dramatic effect on the school district and the community of LaConner. And I just think everybody needs to be aware of how much that cost them. The county was collecting roughly $1.8 million from those 931 parcels. And when we took off the tax rolls, that money was not collected anymore, but the other taxing districts shifted that 1.8 million to the other property owners in those areas. So taxes went up to everybody else in the community. One thing the school district was collecting was about $770,000. After the change, the Swinomish tribe is now paying about $450,000 to the LaConner school district. So that was a dramatic change in what was going into the school district. The other thing that happened with that Great Wolf Lodge decision, we got the FOIA request thanks to Sandy Stokes with LaConner Wakely. Department of Revenue was contacting the tribal lawyers going back and forth before they even told the county what was going on. So these things were happening without us knowing about it. And then when the final rule came out in the Department of Revenue, we didn't have an ability to make any discussion at that time. The other thing was going on, once upstream was an environmental group. EPA was able to get money that went to the Northwest Indians Commission, then it went to the Samish tribe, and then they set up web pages and so forth, going after agriculture community. And the Swinomish tribe is the one that was running that. So those, some of the things that are going on, I just think the public needs to be aware of what's going on with some of these things with the tribe. So we found out, with the help of the Samish, what was going on. We made sure we let you as residents, property owners in this area, this is what's there. We don't know what's going on. We're just letting you know. all three commissioners were back from Washington DC 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. We met with our delegation, our senator delegation, and our representatives, making them aware of what's going on and how dramatically this affects our small community. All of you need to contact your federal delegation, make sure they're aware how it affects you personally and your property. So thank you very much for being here. We'll hope we can answer some questions. And I think the Samish has some comments.
Thank you, Laurie. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. Tribal Council, thanks for being here. I think that shows everybody how important this really is to all of us as well. We also own land out here. It's currently fee simple land, so we're paying property taxes just like everybody else is. We purchased some more land out in this area. We purchased a log cabin home for some more office space. We're kind of running out of room, and it kind of made sense at the time, and then all this happened. So our position over the years, from the time we filed the feeder trust application for the property across the street here, that some of you are stuck in now. Muddy over there. So I've got a 4-wheel drive, but I don't think I can tow you out. But at any rate, our membership was adamant, and this has been an evolving thing. They go, where's our casino? So we more or less got direction towards moving that way. So this property across the street, this 14.5 acres, came up for sale. We worked a deal out with them, and through the process, we worked with the county and the city as well to work with a partnership for all the services that we're going to need if, in fact, we develop it that way. Now, the climate's changing. We're going to have to do another feasibility study, but the last one said, yes, you can make money in doing this. So we moved forward with the feeder trust application for that property. The other property is still, we don't have an application in as of yet. We're working in that direction. But obviously we were impacted by the claim of the expanded reservation. And we found out about that, there's really no good vehicle to expand this reservation. And so we found out one of the methods that they were looking at was this constitutional change. So we realized that not only is Samish going to be impacted, but all you are too, in the event that they're successful in this. So we objected, as did the county and the city, towards those proposed constitutional changes. It's our understanding that, and what you've heard tonight, I haven't heard anything that I can dispute. It's all basically our knowledge as well, that the Bureau rejected the proposed change that they wanted in their constitution. And so that's been taken out. They're moving forward. And I have to say that there are changes that they do need to do. Their constitution was drafted many years ago. I can't remember, in the article it was the 70s or 80s or something, that's the last time it was updated. Just like everything, all the policies and procedures and everything else need to be updated and stay current. They need to be able to do that. Unfortunately, that's not the place to change the boundaries of your reservation, at least for that. So we found out about it, we complained as well. There were some other things in there that we weren't happy about either. We believe those things have also been addressed, so they are, to our knowledge, they are moving forward. But we're part of the community too. I live here in Anacortes. I pay taxes just like all the rest of you. So it is a concern. It is a concern for the tribe as well. In fact, I work out here. So at that, I will hand it over to my attorney, Dorsay. I've invited him to come up and fill in more of the blanks for you folks. So hopefully we can give you guys some good information coming out of here. Thanks.
Hi there. I'm Dorsay, as Tom said. I've been the tribe's attorney for the last 20 years since they got re-recognized. I'm looking forward to your questions, so I'll try and keep this brief, but I want to give you some background. I've practiced Indian law for 38 years now, and that's all I've done. you may think it's confusing dealing with what the BIA does and how they do it. I can tell you we have the same problem. They are a very obscure bureaucracy. They're difficult to deal with. They opposed the Samish tribe becoming re-recognized for 30 years, so they haven't necessarily been the tribe's friend either. But I want to make a couple of points I think might explain some of what's going on. I think in some ways Samish is somewhat responsible for what's going on here, the fact that Swinomish is now asserting this expanded authority because they have opposed everything that Samish has tried to do in the last 40 years, including becoming recognized. They oppose the tribe's federal acknowledgement proceeding. They oppose every piece of legislation that Samish has tried to get passed. They oppose Samish taking any land into trust anywhere for any reason. They oppose any programs that the tribe tries to set up. And the ground is, Genesis is in the fishing rights case because tribes get to fish in the areas where historical tribes fished in Aboriginal times. And in the Bolt decision, the Swinomish tribe obtained a ruling that they are allowed to exercise the Samish tribe's treaty fishing rights. So they're trying to defend against that. They have some members who are descended from Samish, although most Samish are members of the currently federally recognized tribe. When the treaty was signed, the tribes were supposed to go to the reservations. Samish decided not to. They remained in their traditional area. And as a result, they didn't have a lot of dealings with the federal government because those dealings were mainly limited to the reservation lands. And so at some point in 1966, actually a BIA clerk dropped Samish off a list of recognized tribes. And the Department of Interior looked at that list when the treaty rights, the fishing rights case was filed. They said the Samish isn't still recognized as a tribe, so they opposed Samish in getting fishing rights. Treated them as unrecognized, so then Samish, before my time, spent the next 27 years in court trying to get re-recognized, and they were able to prevail in proving that they were the historical Samish tribe. They've always existed, they've continued to exist. And finally, in 1996, the federal government recognized the tribe again. Since then, they've been trying to achieve the same status that every other tribe has. So one essential aspect of tribal sovereignty is having a land base where you exercise governmental authority, you have your housing. So Samish has been trying to obtain land to put into trust. Swinomish has opposed all of that. When the tribe was re-recognized, there are a lot of federal programs that Samish had not been able to participate in. Getting re-recognized, I kind of liken it to when you get out of prison, they give you $50 and a suit and say good luck. Samish didn't get any money when they're re-recognized, the same as all the other tribes. So they've had to fight to get minimal federal funding. And that's kind of where the gaming issue came in, is the federal government's been cutting back on its support for Indian tribes over the years, and they've used casino gaming as a substitute to allow tribes to achieve economic self-sufficiency. So tribes use that money, the revenue from casino gaming, to support their government and their programs. And Samish needs that money even more than other tribes because they have such a low level of federal funding right now. All right, turning to what's happened. So when Samish picked the land across the street as a potential gaming site, Swinomish opposed the tribe. And what they've been trying to do, and that's when they came up with this, it's really on reservation, because there's these regulations, and Darcy, okay, and Will have said this correctly. There's a difference when you apply to put land in trust, there are regulations that apply. And so one of these regulations says one tribe cannot obtain land in trust on the reservation of another tribe unless that other tribe expressly consents. So that's when Swinomish came up with this rationale of, you're on our reservation, so you can't take that land in trust across the street. And that's denying Samish its opportunity to get involved in gaming. So they submitted objections. There has to be a ruling back in Washington, D.C. that the land qualifies for gaming. Not all land that goes in trust can be used for casino gaming. It's very limited, especially if it's off-reservation land. So Samish has to qualify for a very limited exception to use that land. And so Swinomish is using this on-reservation argument to try and stop us from obtaining that land in trust for gaming. So they submitted objections. We've had hundreds, thousands of pages of documents and arguments back and forth on that issue. But this has been where this Constitution issue and this broader assertion of on-reservation status comes in. What Swinomish is trying to do is get the federal government to approve their assertion that the land is on reservation. So when they submitted the original Constitution amendments, their current Constitution says the reservation established by the Treaty of Point Elliott is the 1873 Executive Order Reservation, the current reservation. So they wanted to take that executive order language out and say it's the land established by the treaty, which is the larger area. And if they get, anytime you, under what we call the Indian Reorganization Act, you apply to have your Constitution amended, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Solicitor's Office in the Department of Interior has to review the proposed language, and they won't approve it if they think it's contrary to federal law. So they were hoping they'd get the BIA to sign off on the language, and in fact, the first round of review, no one in the Solicitor's Office caught the fact that they were asserting this larger boundary. They were concentrating on other parts of their amendments and said, oh, don't worry about this part, it doesn't really do anything. And it was actually Will who, I think, saw a Swinomish newsletter that talked about the Constitution. And you couldn't find the proposed language. They weren't distributing that. They were just saying, we're expanding your sovereignty, essentially, trust us. So that's when we started filing Freedom of Information Act requests to get the actual language. And then we raised it and we showed the information back and forth. But they were hoping if they could get the BIA to say, yes, we're approving your proposed amendment, then they can say the federal government agrees with our assertion of a larger boundary. It's the same thing with when they're applying to put land, the Shell station in trust, and they're applying as an on-reservation application, because if the BIA says yes, without looking at it, then they say the federal government approves of our application. So it's this constant strategy of looking for ways to try and get the federal government to approve what they're doing, and then they can turn around and say, see, they agree with us. As Will and Darcy pointed out, there are a number of court cases where they have asserted the expanded boundary in the past and been denied. So we think, one, they're precluded from arguing this again, but it continues, and there has to be a forum where it can be resolved completely. Two other things. So these regulations for fee to trust, the city didn't get notice. The county gets notice. The BIA interprets these regulations narrowly. The regulations say notice goes to the county and the state. That's why the city didn't get notice. The Samish tribe didn't get notice either, even though it had a direct impact on the Samish tribe. So we had to, when we found out about it, we had to write a letter objecting to the fee to trust, to the BIA, and you can ask to be an interested party, and then they have to send you notice from that point on. But it's kind of this constant vigilance you have to exercise to make sure that they're not doing something that you don't find out about. Two other things. What you're really concerned about is if this larger boundary is declared to be part of the Swinomish Reservation, it has some legal impacts on you. And federal law has a definition called Indian country. And Indian tribes are allowed to exercise their governmental authority within Indian country. And there's three definitions of Indian country. One is all lands within the boundaries of an Indian reservation. That includes fee land, trust land, land owned by the tribe, land owned by individuals. So if the larger area is declared a reservation under federal law, it becomes Indian country. Now, Swinomish is correct in that the Supreme Court has placed some limits on what authority tribes can exercise over fee land, but also tribes have, and this is from a tribal advocate standpoint, tribes have pretty broad regulatory authority over the land. Business licenses, regulation, perhaps some taxation and imposition of fees. So the law is not clear. These kinds of cases go on all over the country. The Supreme Court keeps changing its position on what's allowed and not allowed. So bottom line is there's a fair amount of uncertainty. The taxation is a big issue, as Will pointed out and Darcy both pointed out, in terms of land in trust gets removed from the tax rolls. Now, we also agree that tribes should have the right to take land